Hello and welcome to the Zeit Manager IM training series. Today we're going to be talking about data views, which is a feature in Zeit we use to export our project data and share it with other applications. Okay, so today we're going to understand just about how data views work and the different types of data views that we have available within the platform. We're going to learn about the different types of advanced metrics you have available when you create a data view, how to filter your data views, and various configuration settings. Last but not least, we're also going to learn about how to sync and configure our APIs. And we're going to do a demo of connecting one of our data views to Microsoft Excel or Power BI. Okay, so today we have 3 chapters. We're going to go through the process of creating a data view and looking what that looks like. And then we're going to conclude the training with a look at exporting our data and the API feature. Okay, so what is a data view when we discuss data management? So some of you may already be familiar with the word like a data view or a view. It's very common in database syntax to create views, which are ways of looking at our data or interacting with our data. Sometimes these things might be called data exports in other applications. If you're really familiar with database, you might think about SQL syntax and queries or data queries. All of these things are kind of what we're talking about today in this training. A data view is essentially a picture. So if you imagine your Zeit project is always something happening, right? Data is coming in, workflows are running, people are editing submissions, and really what a data view is a picture in time, right? So your project is always changing, and there's never a way to say this is what the data state of your project is without updating that every moment. But a data view is basically a snapshot at a particular moment in time of a particular set of data from your project. Okay, so when we think about what we're talking about, there's lots of different data in Zeit and Zeit Manager. So we have, most obviously the data that's associated with our ODK forms and our submissions, that's our case data. But we also have the case review information, the things like the status and the comments and the other information that we add when a submission comes in as part of a workflow. We have a site list, we have a region list that is associated and kind of stores your forms and submissions. We also have lists of contacts and beneficiaries. And last but not least, we also have some kind of metadata associated with your work in Zeit. So we know who you are, your username, your user profile information. And because we are tracking activity on the back end, we also know kind of what different users are doing, even if that is not necessarily like related to data within a case, right? We know that you did a review, for example, even if we don't know what that review was. Okay, so what can we do with data views? We can do a few things. Basically, what we do is we create a view, which is sort of like a picture frame for a set of data that we want to look at, usually more than once. It can be a one time, but data views are kind of created in a semi-permanent way, and that we can revisit them at a later date, every day, or as frequently as we want. We can also set views to update themselves periodically. So as I said, a data view is a snapshot. We don't want that snapshot to get too old. We don't want to, have a snapshot that's a month old, because that obviously a lot has happened in a month. So we can set our views to sync, meaning just like the mobile app, it will update itself periodically based on the data in your project. So it will kind of retake that picture for us. Lastly, data views are also pretty much the basis through which we share our data from Zeit to other applications, whether that's just like a downloaded Excel file or through an API link. We can share data in lots of different ways, basically. There are 5 steps to building a data view. The first is to just choose what type of view you want to build. Then we define our settings. We select the information we want in that view. We organize how we want that information to be presented. And lastly, we apply some filters. We could remove some of the data in that view that doesn't meet certain criteria. Okay, so the first and most kind of important question we always need to ask ourselves is what kind of data view type is this? And really, to understand that question, we're really asking in our table that we're creating, what does a row represent? And there's obviously different, types of data as we talked about in Zeit, and there may be different kind of table structures associated with those different types of data. So for example, your form data is probably going to be represented in a case report, where each row represents an individual submission of a form. In a site data view type, we're talking about each row representing a site. In our contact and beneficiary tables, we're talking about each row representing a contact or a beneficiary. Region, each row represents a region. User, each row represents a user. A project data type is a data view type is just a single row with your project metrics. And the last one is a row representing each action that you've taken. So if I've made 5 submissions today, I should see 5 rows from me saying that I've made a submission and maybe the form that I submitted. Okay, so which data view type to pick? It really depends on what you're doing and what you want to achieve. Some data view types are more useful in sort of like meta project management, right? If I want to understand what users have, done in my project in the last 30 days, a user activity type is the one for me. But if I want to see what data has actually come in, what data has been submitted, I'm often looking at, case data views. It's common to have multiple data views covering your different needs, right? So we might have one data view that is a site list for our project locations that might show us like where we're working, which sites are active and inactive. And then we might have a case report showing kind of actually what data has been submitted in those different locations, maybe what referrals are open. Regardless of what your view type is, we've designed the feature in such a way that data can be selected from your different data sets, regardless of the view type that you pick. So we make it available, for example, even if you're building a case report or a case view, then you would be able to pull in, let's say, site information like the site population or the site location. So yeah, we've tried to do that as much as possible. You do need to understand a little bit about what type of aggregation might be happening when you do that. But generally speaking, we want you to be able to connect all these tables together easily and access whatever information you need. Okay, so in our demo today, we're going to be building a case type view. Case type views are probably the most common. They're going to be built by pretty much anyone doing a project in Zeit. And really what we know when we select a case view type is that we're going to have, each row representing a case. We know that we're always going to get the primary key with the table. So we're going to get a case ID field. And then we're going to have other fields of information related to our forms in our project. We don't know what those are yet. We haven't selected them. So this is kind of our starting, table. This is what it would look like if we looked at our table at step 1. In step 2, we get the option to configure basic settings. So this is where we can say things like, well, what forms are we querying data from? What language do we want those forms to appear in? So, obviously you can have multiple languages associated with your forms. Do you want it in English, French, Spanish, etc.? You can also decide how you want your field names or your default column name to appear. So do you want to use the ODK labels? Do you want to use the names? What is the default naming that you have included in your data view? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these default column names because they're going to be really important when we start to connect our data views to other applications and do some data sharing, especially with APIs. So as we've talked about previously in other lessons, there's different ways of referencing your COBO fields or your ODK fields in general, and then also specifically within Zeit. So the first is a data label. Let's suppose we have a question, what is your age in one of our ODK forms? So if we selected data label, we would verbatim see what is your age. If we selected group and label, maybe that age question is part of the group demographics. So we would see demographics / what is your age? The third, if we said, hey, actually, we don't want labels, we want to see names, maybe that field in the ODK form itself is called age. And so we would just see age. Similarly, if the group name for demographics was lowercase demographics, we would then see demographics / age if we're selecting group name. It's important to note that kind of what you pick here will determine maybe how durable your report is when it comes to sharing. And I bring this up because, as I said, data labels can change and it won't really affect the underlying address of that data, right? Like ODK and systems in general are going to look for that data name and that group and name when they reference a field, right? That's how they understand the field. So we could change, the question, what is your age, to what is the head of household's age? And the field would still work. It would still exist at the same address. the system would still be able to find it. You could still import data into that field. You would still be able to edit data in that field, even though the label has changed somewhat. But as I said, if you change the label, then the label of these field names would also change, right? Because we've changed the question. And so if we've said, hey, we've updated the data label, in this case, the data label and the data export would change. So if we've changed how we reference that information, it's going to affect kind of some of the connections you might be making with the data view feature. We'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but generally speaking, the best rule of practice is if you're going to be using the API feature, we strongly recommending using data names and custom names, which we'll talk about in a moment. Okay, so let's talk about our case report now. After step 2, let's say we've selected English and we want the ODK names. So now we just know that we're going to have rows representing our various cases. Let's say we've picked our form, we've picked the referral form. We're going to be building a referral case report to see our open status referrals, right, in the system. So this is what we have after step 2. In step 3, we're given the option to do kind of data selection, which is a bit different than how Kobo works. So in Kobo or even in vanilla ODK, when you export data from the platform, it gives you all of the fields of information. So by default, it's just going to give you everything. And that's okay for like a raw data export. Sometimes that's necessary and useful. But oftentimes when we share data, we should be much more conscientious and aware of what we're sharing. And it is often the case that people either don't want, don't need, or shouldn't have access to all of the data fields related to a specific data set. So for example, if I have personal information in a form, it's often the case that people need to see what's in a form without seeing the personal information associated with it. So if I'm making a referral to a wash provider, maybe they don't need to know who provided me that information. They only need to know maybe the location of that problematic or not working wash service, right? So by allowing the user to select fields, we're really encouraging you to be more conscientious in selecting and determining what your data needs are and what data you're trying to share with other people and parties. It should kind of be noted that one of the key uses for this is when you want to make like an analysis or a dashboard, it rarely, if ever, requires personal data, right? We don't really use personal data to do metrics analysis or to do dashboards showing our progress. And this is a great way in which we can create a data view without that personal data. That makes the data view not sensitive, right? Because it doesn't have personal data in it anymore. The information there is hopefully or likely less sensitive simply because it doesn't identify any individual. So really the data selection field, it may feel laborious. You may say, why can't I just select everything at once? It's really much better, and it's really highly recommended in kind of conscientiously selecting what information you want for your various reports. And as I said, you don't have to do this every time. You make a data view once, and then you can update, edit it as frequently as you like. Okay. Another thing you might be wondering at this stage is how is it that when I build a case report that I can select things like the region information, I can select the site information, I can select the user profile information. Really, the magic of that is through what we call relational data sets, where because each of these data sets have primary keys, we're able to really make them speak to each other. So if you think about how you submit an ODK form in our platform, you always have to say what site that's part of. And because we know your user ID, because we know the case ID, as we know which site that case is associated with, and because we know what region that site is associated with, that allows us to reference any of the data associated with those respective tables into your data view feature. Normally, this can be done in sort of any sort of data management process, and many of you probably already know how to do this. But really what we're trying to do here is just make it easy for you to join in this various information from the other tables without making you do that sort of like join logic yourselves. So I've given 2 examples here. One is where if you know the site ID, right, you can always look up the site population. The other is like if we know someone's username, we can look up anything else. So this is just a little bit of an explainer for those of you who might have less experience working with relational data. You're by default, you're requested to select the fields you want to work with, but depending on what view type you've selected, you're going to be always given some default fields, and that's really just because like primary keys should be part of every table, and that's also just like how the feature is needed to work. Like if we didn't do that, it would be really hard to find and debug errors. So by default, you're always going to get the case ID. If it's a site report, you're always going to get the site ID. And so forth and so on. There's usually like a couple default fields with every table. So for example, in the case ID reports, site ID and site name are also included by default. You can drop those fields later if you don't need them, but they're pretty good to have, I would say, in any table, simply because if you're working with someone and you're sharing data and they have a problem or they're trying to reference something, having those reference keys available in their data set is useful. And generally speaking, they're not really private information. They're like these anonymized IDs are really for just like data coordination and data management. Okay. You're also, I think it's pretty clear when we say like, hey, I want to know the site population, we'll always return, the value of the site population. There's one value there. It's a very clear understanding of what you're going to get when you select that field. Or like, I want to know the user's organization that has one value. It's always going to be clear. But there are also things called metric fields, and this is when data gets aggregated. So for example, if we're building a site report, maybe we have a report, an activity report, where we're submitting like, a form tracking the number of people that attend our focus group discussions. So we might want to know, hey, how many people have attended those focus group discussions at a site level? So we want to add up that data over time. And so the way this works is you can add things called metric fields, which are kind of basic aggregations of types of information. And really how data gets aggregated a little bit depends on the data type itself. So, right, like if we're working with numbers, we can add numbers together. We can look at the min and the max. But if we're working with text, I mean, we might only be able to do counts, right? We might only be able to count the number of times the activity was focus group, or we might be able to pick the most recent record or the oldest record, right? So again, a little bit understanding the metrics fields requires you to understand basic aggregations of data, how that data gets aggregated, when you move through different levels of your data. Okay, one of our more advanced data aggregations that we're going to tell you about, because it has the potential, I would say, to impact your work quite a bit, is called this most recent non-null value. So oftentimes we're pulling the most recent value, which basically means like this is the value, or this is the last value that we have for this. So if we built a site report, we could build a site report and say like, give us the last, data or the most recent data we have for monitoring, where we're tracking population, number of toilets, and number of showers. I mean, that would work, and that was how we were working for many years. But then we kind of realized that, hey, oftentimes a lot of information isn't always changing, right? So if we think about a site monitoring form that's very common for us in CCCM and SMS, population is going to change every time. We always want to be tracking the population, but the number of toilets in our collective center, let's say, it's not changing very often. It's not like new toilets are being built every month. Similarly, number of showers, like it probably is going to be the same. Sometimes it changes, so we want the option to change it sometimes, but we don't want to force our enumerator to fill out like 100-question form when really probably, let's say, only 20 questions are really changing. So we can think about, some of the information we're collecting is very dynamic. It's always updating. We always want to be tracking it. And other information is more static. So if that's the case, you can set it up so that rather than requiring your users to like always count the number of toilets, always count the number of showers, as long as they do that once, you can then design your form in such a way that makes it that if the user skips the information, it's okay, because when you build your data view can take the most recent non-null value. So in this case, I have four monitorings. I do my monitoring for site one every month, and you'll see that every month I'm tracking the population, but not every month I'm recording information about the number of toilets and number of showers. I did that the first time when I made the site profile, let's say in January, but after that, I only updated the number of showers in March when, let's say, there's some repair work, and now there's 2 more showers. What this means is that as the data gets compiled across those multiple reports, Zeit will skip blank rows. So if it doesn't find information, it will go to the next oldest case to find, what relevant information is there. This really can save you a ton of time, especially for any sort of monitoring or profiling or any sort of like dynamic information that you're collecting about a site where you really assume there's one value for a site, right? Like a site can really only have one number of toilets, right? It's either, 23 or 20 or it's something, right? But you don't probably need to track that every time, and it doesn't change that much. So this is a really good approach to allowing you to kind of create site profiles regardless of what your site is, update them dynamically without forcing users to fill out like 100 questions every time they visit or every time they open that form. And if you'll see, if we set up this data view such that each of these fields was most recent non-null value, this would be the values that actually get put into the data view, right? It would be a combination of values from different reports over different periods of time. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about good field selection. So as I said, it's very common that we will default to being like, okay, well, I'm making a data view. I just want to select all of the data. As I said, sometimes that makes sense. Sometimes that's necessary. But oftentimes we really should be thinking like very conscientiously what information needs to be included. And I will just say off the bat, if we're building like a referral summary report for our manager or a data view for our manager, which let's assume in this demo, that's what we're going to be doing. Our manager doesn't want to see every single field, right? They don't like, it's not nice to share data with someone and have 100 fields of information, many of which are blank, many of which like they don't need to know the ODK version. Maybe they don't even need to know the username, right? So for our referral summary for our manager, they only want to see, open referrals for the team meeting that they do every week with us. So for that, they're going to need to know the site information. Maybe we have a lot of sites, so the region information is going to be like helpful to them. And then they probably like from the form itself, they really only want to know maybe like what cluster is it, what description is it, and maybe any other notes. So kind of actually only 3 fields the way we've built our referral form. And then, they might also want to know the status, right? Like we want them to be able to say like, is this case open or closed, or is it in progress, right? That's also relevant. We might also, want to share with them like, hey, how old is this? So we're going to include the submission date. So when we think about it, this summary report from our manager, you may think like, oh, they need all of the referral data. Actually, for the purposes of what they're doing, they probably only need 8 fields. Those 8 fields are going to be easier to share, faster to download, easier to navigate. And overall, you're going to end up with like a much cleaner, easier to understand table for the users and the people you're working with. Okay, so we selected those fields. I'm jumping forward. We're going to show you how to do that in the interface at the end of this. But basically, once we selected those fields, the information related to those fields is going to appear. So we're selecting kind of obviously the region information is there, the status is there, the description, the cluster, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll notice that because while in this, it's not appearing as ODK names, it's appearing as labels. But if we selected labels, this would be kind of how it appears. Okay. Step 4, we're going to be given the option to organize our columns. So what does this mean? In kind of SQL database syntax, it's very funny in that actually the order at which you select the columns is the order at which they appear in the report. So if you want, things in the first place, you select that first. If you want things in the 10th place, you select the 10th, right? That kind of makes sense in the sense that like oftentimes we want to see information presented, not just like all together. We want like the site information group together. You want the cluster maybe to appear before the description, right? Like that makes the report and the table much easier to read than if it's some sort of like randomized order. So in step 4, you can do that as you select, but often you might get something wrong or you might add something at the end and then you can't rearrange things. Step 4 allows you to reorder, your fields. And then it also allows you to rename them. And this is a really great idea, as I said, because labels can change. When they change, if you have used this data view, especially with the API feature to connect the data view to another application and you're using labels and you change those labels, your connection will break, especially on those particular fields. So it's always great to rename columns. It's also a good idea to rename columns because like something like what is their age or just the ODK name age, it doesn't really like make sense, right? Like whose age is it, like maybe your boss knows, maybe it doesn't know. It's kind of like weird to present things as like the exact verbatim question text. Like how we ask a question to an enumerator or how we include that in the form is often different than how we consume that information in a table. So for example, if the person we're asking is the head of household, we might want to rename that question to HOH, right? Which is like short. My boss understands that that means the head of household's age. This also allows us to improve the stability of the API connections, because even if like the fields remains, called age, and we change what is their age to what is the head of household's age, and we have renamed that HOH age, the connection will still be preserved, right? We're really renaming off the ODK name. We're not renaming off the label, though we do show you the label when you do this renaming. Cool. So let's say I've renamed stuff and reordered stuff, and now I get like a much neater table, right? Now this table is starting to look like something my boss might want to use in the weekly meeting. They have, the site ID, the region information up front. They can see the district, but then they're also able to see like the population information, after that, the status, the cluster, the description. That seems like a good reading order. That seems like how I would read each row in sort of like a natural way. Step 5, I then have the ability to apply some filters. So this is pretty obvious. This works like just like any sort of table filtering. The idea here is that, again, it's a way for us to restrict or limit how much data is shared. So, right, maybe we want to share wash issues, but we really only need to share those for a certain district. We don't need to share like all of the wash issues for the entire country or the entire response. We only want them for a particular site, a particular region. These filters allow us to really easily pull out that information. You also have the ability to filter by the data that you've added to the form, so you can always add some filters. A particular note, we have a few different options for date filters. So we have a like fixed date filter, which means, hey, if you pick like fixed date week, it means this week's worth of data. So this calendar week will export when we hit next week. It'll be next week's data. Day and week are probably not so useful. They're there just because they're easy to add. But month and year are useful. So for example, if you wanted like just this calendar year, you would have all of the data from 2026. When the year turns over, you would then start getting data from 2027, but data from 2026 would be removed. You can also pick a certain before or after date to create like cutoff times. That's quite useful. Yeah. Rolling is one of my favorite, right? Oftentimes we have like kind of a window of freshness, as we've talked about, where we need to be sharing the last 30 days of referral, or we need to be sharing the last X days of something. So that rolling filter allows a 30-day window to be created. So if we say last 30 days, it means that it will be, 30 days before today. And kind of moving as the calendar moves with us. Similar with custom dates. So that means like, hey, I only need a report from Q1 of last year, January 1st to the end of March. Allows you to do that. Just pick 2 specific dates. So we've, let's say, filtered out the closed tickets or the closed cases, and then we would end up with this final table. Once we hit next on the filtering step, it'll take us to what we call the final preview, or the data view preview. And this is actually where you can see how things look in Zeit, or how your data view looks, I should say. Okay, so we're gonna now do a demo where we go through those steps. We're actually gonna build our data view or parts of our data view. We may not do the full thing, but this allows you to familiar yourself with the UI, how it works, and I'm gonna show you some tricks that may or may not be obvious to you. Cool, so here we are in our IM training series. I'm in my project page, and you'll notice this data tab. If I click this, you'll see that we have our data views. Harris has made a test report for this project, and you can see basic information about it. You can see the type of information, the type of view it is. It's a case view. This ID is the unique ID given to reports across the platform, which allows us obviously to kind of communicate with technical teams, with a developer, between ourselves, right? I can say, hey, Harris, what's with view 3011? Is this used, et cetera, et cetera? What's it for? You also see the last date it was synced. So this is how fresh it is. It's syncing daily, which means it synced yesterday. It hasn't synced yet today. Okay, so I'm going to create a new view, and you'll see here are my view types. I have the different options we talked about. We have options that I didn't even mention, like task view, which shows us all our tasks. And we're going to click on case report. So here we're going to make our open ticket, or our open case summary, or open referral, let's call it. You'll see that I can also optionally add a description. So we can say for management meeting, to discuss open referrals with team, right? This is quite useful. I know it's not really mandatory that you do this, but it is helpful because if you start creating a lot of views and you work in a team with multiple IMs, or your manager is also coming in and looking for the right reports, they may want to know this information, right? Like might help them to understand what this is for. We're going to choose our form. So we're going to choose here the, let's say, service referral form. If we also wanted information from the completion form, we would also need to select this one as well. But because we're only looking at the kind of open referrals, we only need to select this one. Cool. The language is going to default to English because I think there's only one language. And then you'll see here my different options, and you'll see there's explanatory text. So what is your gender, male, female? You'll see kind of just a different version of what I showed you earlier. So we're going to click data name for the purposes of this. On next, you'll see that we have these kind of different categories of information, right? So I can, add region information by clicking region. And if I wanted the region name, I can click here. And you'll notice that this is, if I click region name, it's going to give me all 3 names of the region. So if I have 3 levels of region selected, it would give me region 1 hyphen region 2 hyphen region 3. But if I actually wanted to have those separately, so if I wanted the first name as a field and the second region name as a field, I could just click here, remove this kind of concatenated string, and just pick these 2. So this is the first and second level regions. I don't need the location of the region. Here on the site information, you'll see I already have site ID and site name by default included. But if I wanted to, for example, have population, I could include the population here. There's only one value, so there's no metric field. There's only one value for population that I could pull into this report. On case information, then I can come here. So I'm going to want to know the status, which is considered part of case information. It's not part of the form itself. So this is where I can select, maybe I want the case status, maybe I want the reason as well. And then I actually want data from the form. If I want user information, you'll see that there's user information, but also reviewing user, which is 2 things, right? So one is the person who submitted the form. The other is the person who is reviewing the form. So here on individual form metrics, I can also select some metrics about the form. If I want the form information itself, it's down in this section. So I can click service referral, and you'll see here the different fields in my form neatly laid out. Things from the similar group are grouped together. So like if I wanted the whole group, I could just do that. If I wanted just specific questions from the group, I can pick that. And it also tells you what kind of the data types that you're working with here. Actually, as we said, I only really need cluster and description for this. My boss is not looking for all of the information. They don't need to know people's names. They just want to know like an overview of what types of referrals we're managing. So fields are selected. Seems about right. I have about 7 fields selected. If I wanted to include the note, I can include the note. If you notice, you can also do some rearranging here if you really want, but we're going to be able to rearrange on this next page as well. So on this next page, you'll see that we're able to kind of see how this information is going to appear in the report. And we're also going to be able to kind of rename it. So in this region name, first level region name, obviously we don't, probably want our data referred this way. We maybe call this like district, right? And maybe this is township in our project. So this is just like a way in which we can do that renaming pretty quickly. So for population, let's say I don't want that IDPs present. I don't need this big case status. I can just say, I want to call this status. I want to call this referral result, right? To help my boss understand what information is there. And then I want to call this cluster, description, and note. Okay? So that's my renaming. You can see it's pretty fast. If I wanted to do some rearranging of things, I could rearrange here as well. Last but not least, we have referrals, and you'll see the types of filter are kind of broken up into different sections. So, I can filter by sites, individual sites. I can also filter by site type, site status. I can filter by particular regions, right? In our project, we have actually countries instead of districts and townships, and continents. So yeah, users, right? All kind of the basic, I would say, filters that you might want. As I said, you can also add some filters in. So here it's giving me the option to add tags in, because tags, if you remember through our workflow, are added to our case. It may also be the situation, depending on your kind of what fields you've worked with. Like if you add a select question, you may see that available as a filter, but it's not available for things like calculates, which is what we selected from this form. Okay, so we don't want, as I said, we don't want closed tickets. We're only interested in things that are currently open. So I'm going to select these four because they're all open. And you'll see that we have different options of different date ranges available to also select for me. Great. So our view has been created, and it's going to show us our preview now in the actual viewer. We only have 3 rows. We don't have a lot of data associated with this project. Also, by default, if this looks a bit off to me, if something seems strange in the data view, I can click this, and this should open a link for me. So you'll see here it open the actual submission, and I can kind of review it here. If I want to jump back to the data view, I can navigate back. So now we're on the preview page, but we're not done yet. Technically it's built, it's ready to go. But you'll notice like there are no exports, which means like, right, how can I download this? Basically, the view is like the picture frame. Now we need to take the picture. So in order to do that, we simply hit export, and then the data is going to start exporting from our project. So if we give it a moment, you'll see it is generated, and now I can download my data view for the first time. So this should then, if we just open it, it should be what we've configured. And now it means that my boss can come in here anytime, hit export, and they will get this neat report available to them. There's no population information for these sites because we didn't add it. Okay. Maybe one last thing. We can also write if my boss or someone, so if my boss is a project manager, meaning they have the project manager user permissions, they're going to have access to all the reports for the project. But if they were a reviewer or they had a lower level of permission that wouldn't normally give them access to the data view feature, I would be able to share this with them and say, hey, I want these people to be able to see this report as well, even though maybe they're not part of our project that way. Okay. And then last but not least, right? So now we can see this as part of the table. Some other just basic features to share with you. One is I can add this to my quick view, which will highlight it and keep it kind of pinned to the top. This is useful. Like if my boss is always opening this, maybe they check it every day even, and they want to be able to download it and bring it to meetings. I can star it. It'll always stay at the top. It's just like easier to find. I can also duplicate it. So for example, my boss wanted this one. It only had open referrals. If I wanted now to make one with all the referrals, right, I can just say like all referrals. Let's say the same information. I don't want to rename things. Everything is the same except for maybe the filters. This is a really easy way in which you can create a new report. It's often used exactly for this, where you have 2 very similar reports and you're just filtering them differently. Like maybe one is for one organization's data, the other is for the other organization or location or site. It's a really quick way to kind of create your data views appropriately when you need them. Cool. So that is our demo on building data views. Now, as I said, we're going to talk a little bit more about exports and APIs. So as I said, an export is a snapshot of your data. And it's important to realize that even though you've made a data view, you need to actually export your data. And all exports are different than syncs, and that exports are manual. So exports will need to be triggered by the user. And then what it will do is it will take that picture. And then when it's done, that picture is available to download to the interface. I think Zeit keeps about 15 of your most recent pictures, and then it starts to delete them to save some space on the server. Let's also talk about what is an API. So you've maybe heard this word or this acronym before. API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's a really fancy word, let's say, for basically a data connection. Like you can think about it as a bridge or some sort of cord that connects Zeit data, your view, what you've exported there, to another program or another interface, right? So API basics. Basically, Zeit uses REST APIs. REST APIs is a really common convention for APIs used in many internet programs or web-based programs. Lots of programs use this. ODK, Kobo uses it in their API feature. It has some limitations. So for what we're doing, we're really using our REST APIs. APIs can do many things, but in this case, we're using it to fetch data. We're using it to kind of retrieve and pull data, we would say. Right? But it can actually only pull so much before it starts to encounter kind of technical issues. So even when you have a really fast computer and you have a really fast internet, it's at 30,000 rows and beyond that, it's going to start failing. When it exactly fails, where that breakpoint exactly is, it's really hard to say because it's not really measured by the number of rows. It's measured by the number, the data volume. So you may get more rows if we have like a very short or narrow report, right? If we only have like 5 fields of data, we might even go beyond 30,000, right? But if we have 100 fields in our report, we probably won't even get to 30,000 rows, right? So the exact amount depends on the number of fields, with more fields meaning fewer rows before you reach what we call a timeout, which is where it fails to load and it kind of gives up. So more fields, more rows also means slower load time, right? So even if it's able to load, if you have weaker internet, slower PC, those two things together means it might be, a minute or more before it actually loads in. If you're loading short reports like we just did, you'll notice they generate quickly from Zeit. They're also like pulled through the internet faster and easier. Yeah. And just to understand what a timeout is. So when you kind of hit timeouts, it doesn't really mean that anything's broken. It just means like you've exceeded the limits of something, right? Like if you imagine trying to pass 100 liters of water through a straw, that's going to take a lot of time. And really what technology is often designed to do is it'll give up at some point, right? Like it maybe lets a half liter go through before it says like this is not working, right? It needs to sort of like complete the operation in a specified amount of time. We're going to talk about syncing. So as I said, we can manually export data, and I showed you how to do that in our demo. But a better way to often do this is, let's say like we want the data to sync automatically. This is often really important when you use the API feature, because the API feature is only going to reference the last snapshot, the most recent snapshot. And that's we rarely want to go back, 6 months ago. Usually we want to see like the snapshot as of today. So in order to do that, what we want to do is we want to like set a sync setting basically. And in our sync settings, we can say how often to take the picture. Like we don't want to go in and tell Zeit to take a picture every day. We want it to do it automatically. So I'll show you at the end of this. We can set up our sync settings such that the report is taken on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. We can pick the time of day. The time zone will always be based on what you've set as your local project time. So if we're in Afghanistan and we say we want it to sync 1 a.m., it will sync 1 a.m. Afghanistan's time. It doesn't mean if we say we want it to sync at 1 a.m., it will sync immediately at 1 a.m. You need to understand that things happen in kind of a queue process. So Zeit queues up work in the server. And when that work is actually done, it may be like up to an hour later. So maximum that report might sync 50 minutes later if the server is busy. This is why we recommend really syncing reports outside of office hours or outside of busy hours. If you need the report during the busy hour, it's good to do a manual sync instead of trying to do like these auto syncs during busy server times. They'll still happen, but they will take longer, and they, as I said, they can take up to an hour. And last point is, as I already mentioned, the API is only going to reference the last available data. So, this is tricky. If you set it to, sync once a month and it is on the 1st of the month and it is the 25th, that means what you're seeing is 25 days old. Okay, so APIs, when they pass this data, as I said, it's passed in a specific structure called JSON. So many of you already know what JSON structure is, but for those of you who don't, JSON uses kind of a convention of lists and dictionaries. So let's talk a little bit about what a list is. A list in programming or in many kind of data languages is a list of names or things, right? So in this example I've given you, we have a list of strings, so a list of text values. One is gender, one is name. And we can imagine maybe these are data fields, right? I have a table with the field name and gender. And so this is a list, right? And a dictionary is a similar type of data structure where we imagine that as like, it's called a key value pairing. And the way that's shown is with a colon. So on the left side of the colon, you have the key that's like what you would look up in the dictionary in order to retrieve a meaning, right? So if we're going through a dictionary, you would look for a specific word, and then next to the word is a meaning. But really, dictionaries in programming allow us to make any sort of key value pairs, right? Like the value could be anything. It's not always a definition. In our case, we have here a dictionary, and the dictionary contains two keys, right? Gender and name, and it has two values. So with gender, we've associated male, and with name, we've associated with Bob. In the JSON structure, it's actually a list of dictionaries. So you have like lots of different data types coming together to actually transfer the table. And that string itself, if we go to the next screen, so that string of gender male, age 23, name Bob, gender female, age 34, name Sarah, will actually be read by the receiving table or program, let's say, as the below. So just to like, not something you necessarily need to know, but something that's good to know, because you'll see that you can actually see the raw JSON output from the API itself. You don't need to necessarily work with this structure, but it is helpful, I would say, in understanding how these things work. Okay, so as I said, data view specifications, we've already gone over this, but again, just to reiterate the point, 30,000 rows. When we start going beyond that, we need to start implementing, let's say, management practices and techniques that allow us to go beyond that limit. So there are things you can do to go beyond the 30,000 row limit. We're going to talk about in a moment. Basically, you have two solutions available for you. One is to just shrink your data view, right? Like I think it's often taken for granted when we start a project, we're like, well, we want to see everything, because there's not much there, right? Like there's, as you see in our project, there's 3 rows. There's not a lot. But as time goes on, it's, maybe we've run the referral process for like a year. You have to ask yourself, do we really need to be looking at stuff a year ago for this particular data view? Maybe we do. Maybe we're doing some analysis or some reporting to a donor at the end of a year, and we need all the data there for that purpose. But in that case, we might be able just to manually download it. So something not mentioned is this limit applies to the API. The limit doesn't necessarily apply to Excel. You can go in Excel beyond 30,000 rows, no problem. The Excel file will still generate and be downloaded, no problem. Like that, your computer can handle. It's the transmission through API that has a particular limit. So one way around that, as I said, just shrink the report. How do you shrink the report? Filters, really easy. So in our report where our boss is asked for open issues, maybe those build up over time, and we can ask our boss, hey, do you really only need to see open ones? Open ones should be hopefully like a pretty good filter, because hopefully we don't have too many things open at once. But we could also apply like a rolling date filter. So things that have been open in the last 30 days or from the last 30 days that are open, I should say. So that's one way to get report sizes smaller. That is the least technical approach. So if you're not confident in your IM skills, if you don't really understand a lot about APIs or how to manage larger data sets, this is the approach we recommend. If you absolutely need the full larger data sets, if you absolutely need them to work over API, you're going to need to start implementing more advanced technical solutions. The solution for this is what we call pagination. Pagination is a way through which, rather than loading all of your data in one go, you're going to ask the program that you're using, that could be Excel, that could be Python code, whatever it is, rather than say, hey, load all 50,000 rows, you're going to say, hey, load 10,000 rows at a time. And because it's completing tasks and moving to the next one, it's not going to fail. So Zeit does support that. We have documentation on pagination, which is a part of this training module online. So if you want to reference that, please do. Or if you ever need it sent to you, we can send it to you. It is available. The API does support pagination. That said, pagination is not magic. It does not work on it's like, it's not just like you add a page number. You need to set it up and configure it based on the application you're using it, which is why it's more technical. Okay, so how do form changes affect data views, which is worth talking about, because actually pretty much when you change your data view will usually like update itself, right? So if you add stuff, it gets added, but especially when you're using APIs, things are not necessarily fully automatically connected. So things that are automatic are, if my user adds submissions, and as long as those aren't filtered out, they will appear in the data view, right? If we add choices to the form, so let's say, I had gender male, female, I wanted to also add other, and then someone identifies as the other gender, that's fine. That'll get added. You don't need to do anything. That is covered. What is not covered is, for example, if we deleted that gender question in the form, but it was still part of the data view, what would happen is the data in that field would appear as blank because you kind of told Zeit, hey, that's not here, but your data view isn't necessarily dynamically updating for various reasons. So you would need to go in, if you've removed gender from your form, you would then need to remove gender in your data view if it was included. Similarly, if you add a data view, let's say we add a question, instead of gender, we want to know, I don't know, head of household gender, we've changed it to something else. If we add it to the form and we want it in the data view, we need to add it to the data view. So again, if you start making lots of changes to your forms, you need to update your data views, and then you need to update your API connections as well. Again, changing ODK field names, Zeit will read this as a new field. There's no such thing as like changing a name from one thing to another. So like if you change gender to HOH_gender, that is basically two things. It's removing the field gender. It's adding a new field called HOH_gender, right? So there's no such thing as changing. That will basically make the gender field blank, and the HOH gender field would need to be added. Similarly, if you change the type of a question, ODK and Zeit, they're not just both remembering the name, they're remembering the data type. So you can't just swap types, mid deployment and expect it to go fine. What will happen is the old type. So like if gender or age is a good example, where maybe we moved from recording age as a number like 32, 34 to ranges. So like under 18, adult. If we did that change, just changing the type, the integers would be lost in the first version, and then the text values would begin to appear in the data view report. Okay, so we've covered that. As I said, what we're going to do now is we're going to take our report, we're going to connect it to Excel. I'm going to show you some of the optional settings you have in Zeit for that. I'm going to show you some of the basic settings you have in Excel for that, since that's often what we're using. And then, yeah, I think that should cover the basics for working with APIs. Okay, so here we are in our data view. You'll see here that if I click under more, I have the option to configure sync settings. So this is, as I said, where we manually ask the report to sync at a certain frequency. We can also sync to Google Sheets, which I didn't really speak about, but what this would do is it's going to overwrite that Google Sheet every so often. So you would set a frequency, you would log into Google, pick what sheet, and it would sync to that sheet, replace the data there basically. For syncing to API, we set the frequency. So we want this report every day. But you'll notice we have a lot of options here, right? We can do every 2 weeks, we can pick a month, and we can pick the 30th of the month, we can pick the 15th of the month, right? Really no problem there. Let's say every day. That's a really easy use case. And you'll see here again, these are our time windows. So we wanted to sync between 3 and 4, and you'll notice this is Swiss time, CHE. So I'm going to go save, and then that's it. My sync is configured. You'll see here now I have a sync history tab, which shows how often it's frequently synced. So this is automatic, and these are manual syncs. Yeah. Cool. And it doesn't show the previous one because this is, if you remember, this is the duplicate report. This is my all referral report. So let's export. If there's nothing exported, if you've never exported, never synced, your API will fail because your API is looking for something there, and there's no version of that report ever to have existed. To get the API link itself, you'll see that it's here, and you'll see that if I want to regenerate the link, If I do this, it will break anyone using this connection. The way this is structured, let's copy it and take a look at actually the raw data. So it looks like a web URL, right? And you'll notice the report ID is part of the URL. So this is report 6126. And you'll notice it has this phrase key equals. This is actually the access key. If you don't have the access key, you won't be able to access this link. These are called token-based APIs, for those of you who want to know. And you'll see here, this is this JSON structure of data, right? Like I've got that list structure with the square brackets, curly brackets. Each one of these dictionaries represents a row. So this is my row with this case, and these are the values for the different fields. But obviously this is not easy to read. I don't want to look at the data this way. My boss doesn't want to look at this data this way. So let's connect it to Microsoft Excel. So I'm going to just open a new sheet here. I'm going to go to the data tab and I'm going to say, I want to get this data from web because technically this is like a web URL. And I'm just going to paste my API here and hit OK. And then you'll see here that it presents the data in this kind of funny structure. If you'll notice, it says this is a JSON document. So it understands it's JSON, but JSON is not what we call tabular format. So the first thing you want to do is you want to hit this, convert this to table. And it'll say, okay, do you want to create a table from these values? And you say, okay. And then it says, okay, here's your table. And you'll need to hit this expand button, which allows you to expand the columns. You can uncheck this to get rid of the column name that it adds. And then there you go. Boom. We have our table here. And then keep in mind, this tool is called Power Query. So this is what works with Power BI if you make Power BI dashboards. But this will also work with Excel, most importantly. So now what I've done is I've connected my Excel file to that API link. What that means is that tomorrow when that API link updates, if I come in here and I push this refresh button, you'll see this query over here is refreshing and it'll pull in new information. It's important to keep in mind you can't edit data here, right? It's a picture. Like if I scribble on a picture, I haven't changed reality. So, right, I can delete the information here. I can write in new information, right? But it's not changing in Zeit. This is important to note. Some non-technical people don't understand, right, that it's not a two-way connection. This is a view. It's looking through a window. It's looking at a picture. You can't change anything in reality. In reality, the data is stored on Zeit. If I hit refresh, you'll notice that the data will come right back. So that's just evidence that you really can't change it, even if you write over it. What you can do, just to show you a few more features of Power Query, one thing you can do is you can label this report. So you can say 6126, which is my all referrals report. And then you can actually do a lot of data transformations in this report itself. So for example, you'll see this referral hyphen. Maybe I want to remove that. Maybe I want to take this and say, I want to get rid of that hyphen. So I'm going to go replace values, referral, space hyphen, and I want to replace that with nothing. So if I run this operation, it cleans up that column. So you can do your data transformation here. That's often a useful way to clean some stuff up, to do some spot corrections. You may have noticed you can also apply your filters here as well. So you can filter at this level. However, just keep in mind that kind of the more transformation you do here, the more kind of connections you're making to the contents of the data itself. And these sort of queries or these sort of transformation processes, they can break. If you'll notice that Power Query has like these steps of everything I've done. Like the first step, I replace the value, then I filter the rows. And each of those is actually using the namings of the field. So this is why I said, you know, if your names are changing and you have these names referenced in Power Query, it will cause problems for you later on. So this is actually the code that has been implemented in your data view, and you'll notice that by hitting the advanced editor, you're able to see that. Okay, so this is the Power Query feature. I'm not going to talk too much about this. There are a million trainings online about how to use Power Query. AI tools are great at advising you on how to use Power Query. If you want to know more, we recommend you take one of those lessons or sources. We're going to include a few in the lesson description. Okay, so just going to relabel this sheet, all referrals. Some other things you can do that are useful. One is if you go to refresh all and you go connection properties, you can check this information called refresh data when opening this file. This means that when the user opens this file, the data will be refreshed automatically. So this, people sometimes forget to push this button and might be looking at old data. So if they close the file and reopen it, it will automatically refresh. That's quite useful to have when you set up these files for your team members and for your management. You can also do things like if you push properties, you can set the default behavior, like should the columns length be adjusted, what should sort of happen with the formatting that you apply. So you can say preserve or overwrite formatting, for example. Last but not least, that I think is maybe worthwhile mentioning is things like this web URL link. Don't worry that if someone does not have access to Zeit Manager, meaning they don't have a username and they would not normally be able to see this case, it means that this link will not work for them. They will get an error that says you do not have permission to view this. You need to log in first. If they're logged in and they don't have permission, it will still say you don't have permission for this. So just to note, you don't need to be so concerned if you share files with links in them. But they're also very useful for obviously checking data and going to the source. The other thing just to note is that when we set up these queries, another thing to note is a great thing to do when you share these files is to password protect them if they contain sensitive information. So again, I'm not going to cover that in this training. There's a million, guidance features on how to do that. You can do that by protecting workbooks. This would prevent the user from editing the query, for example. You can also go to kind of the main settings here of the worksheet. I don't know off the top of my head, but you can password protect the workbook from even opening. This is great if you are using Excel files connected to API links with personal data. That is recommended that you do that. Okay, so that concludes our demo. As I said, working with APIs might be hard at first, but I promise it gets easier and easier. The kind of basic recommendations are to start small, start with smaller reports, use the custom renaming feature. That's going to help you in the long run as things start to change. Be aware of how many rows you're trying to load in, especially if you have limited internet or bandwidth. Use Excel to start off with. Use the Power Query feature in Excel. It's a great kind of starting place to learn more about APIs and how they work. Through that, you'll learn, what breaks the API or the connection to the API and what doesn't. I will say this, there's a lot of breakages that just come from you having changed your form, you having changed your data view, and then that information often needs to be updated in the Excel file itself. As I said, it's a connection. If you change one side of the connection, you also need to make the corresponding changes to the other side. As I said, knowing what will or will not impact the connection is a lengthy discussion. But yeah, as I said, it often is really quick to fix. Often the error messages that you get in Excel will tell you what's going on. If you do feel like for some reason the Zeit data view feature isn't working, if things aren't syncing on time, if things aren't loading right, you can always reach out, let us know, make a bug report, and we'd be able to help you and take a look. Okay, so that concludes today's training. Thank you for sitting through it, and hope that